Tonight, the Queen preempts a royal family feud.
Harry, Meghan, and Archie are coming to Canada.
The Queen is so determined to try and find some kind of compromise.
Lots of questions for Canadians about security, the cost, and where the family will live. We've got some answers.
It's official. The Conservative race to replace Andrew Scheer begins.
Congratulations to those men.
After a blockbuster year for women film directors, why Oscar shrugged again.
And nearly a week after the downing of Flight 752, grief makes room for anger. In Canada,
Shame on you! Shame on you!
And in Iran. The emotion, the investigation, the politics.
Now to a surprise royal ruling. Queen Elizabeth says Prince Harry and his wife Meghan can call Canada home part-time. CBS 2's Suzanne Lemonnier now with what happened at today's emergency meeting.
It's the first time the Queen came face-to-face with Prince Harry after he and his wife Meghan dropped the bombshell. They were pulling back from their royal roles. Her Majesty released a statement after the meeting supporting Harry and Meghan's decision, saying although we would have preferred them to remain full-time working members of the royal family, we respect and understand their wish to live a more independent life as a family while remaining a valued part of my family. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex made the announcement on Instagram last week, reportedly blindsiding the Queen and leaving people asking who is to blame.
It's not just about Meghan, it predates that.
Royal commentators point to tensions between Harry and his brother Prince William.
There is a pecking order in the royal family, and there were times where quite often he had ideas about what he wanted to do that he'd have to run by his brother, and I think he found that difficult.
The family summit at the Queen's estate in eastern England included Prince Charles and Prince William. Meghan reportedly joined the meeting over the phone from Canada, where she's now with son Archie. Prince Harry and Meghan say they'll be splitting their time between the UK and North America and will work to become financially independent. But questions remain about who will pay for their transatlantic lifestyle, their security detail, which is currently covered by British taxpayers, and how they'll be able to keep their UK home, Frogmore Cottage. The Queen called Monday's discussions constructive, but said deciding Harry and Meghan's future path is complex, and she hopes final decisions can be reached in the coming days.
Now, as the final details are worked out, it's still not clear if the couple will continue to be known as the Duke and Duchess of Sussex or if they'll be stripped of their royal titles, since the Queen referred to them by only their first names in her statement. Live in the newsroom, Suzanne Lemonnier, CBS 2 News.
Today, a rebellious prince was summoned by a duty-bound queen, and something had to give.
A royal summit was called to avert a crisis. Now, controversy has been boiling over in the days since Harry and Meghan made a historic announcement on Instagram, no less, that they intend to step back as senior royals to build an independent life. Today, the Queen confirmed their intention to live at least part-time in Canada. Now, people here will want to know what that might cost, and we'll look into that. We'll also examine how the royals might use this as an opportunity to evolve. But first, the CBC's Renee Filipponi tells us about this monumental change in the royal script, why it's happening now, and how it came to be.
That fairy tale day, just 20 months ago, when the world tuned in for Harry and Meghan's wedding, now seems like a distant memory. Today, the media focused on the Queen's Sandringham estate as she summoned Princes Charles, William, and Harry to discuss the couple's now uncertain future as royals. Following the meeting, she issued a statement calling the talks very constructive, saying the royal family is entirely supportive of Harry and Meghan's desire to create a new life as a young family, though they would have preferred them to remain full-time working members.
The Queen is so determined to try and find some kind of compromise that keeps Harry within the fold, because if Harry was to turn his back on royal duties entirely, I think that would be devastating for the Queen, for the family.
But there are crucial details to work out. What will their role be? Can they keep their Royal Highness's title? And how will they support themselves financially?
There are going to be so many lucrative offers for them going forwards. The most toxic thing for the royal family is being seen to cash in on your royal status
It's been 5 days since the Duke and Duchess of Sussex made the announcement, and the story continues to dominate the headlines. Princes Harry and William are raising concerns about how the media is covering it.
A media report today suggested William bullied the couple out of the family. The brothers deny it, and in a rare joint statement called the report offensive and potentially harmful.
I absolutely hate the fact that this is being called Megxit.
This UK journalist says Meghan seems to be taking the fall, and she isn't surprised.
Meghan has been vilified by the press for months and months and months now. There's been coverage against her that's been, sexist, racist, all sorts of things, and I just don't find it shocking that her and Harry have finally decided this is it.
From the decision to leave to how the couple went about it, people are looking for someone to blame, as the couple's decision to seek privacy has only pushed them further into the spotlight.
Okay, so Renee, let's talk a bit more about the Queen's message today. It had a distinctly different tone from when the news first broke.
That's right, Andrew. Last week, the palace statement was very short, 2 sentences saying it was a complicated issue that would take some time to work through. Today, from an institution known for its formality, a much more personal tone from the Queen. She calls the Duke her grandson and refers to the couple by their first name, not their title. This was a statement about family. In fact, she used the word 8 times at a time when she's really trying to keep her family together and preserve their place in history. Andrew?
Okay, the CBC's Renee Filipponi at Buckingham Palace tonight. So now that Prince Harry and Meghan's move here is a go, how are Canadians feeling? And are they going to be stuck paying the security bills? The CBC's Catherine Cullen has that side of the story.
At the Royal Oak pub, the royal response is just so very Canadian.
I mean, if they want to come, they're more than welcome.
The New York Times reports Harry and Meghan have left many Canadians giddy.
I think they should live their lives however they want.
I think that's a very reasonable proposition, actually.
The British Mirror says the possibility of paying for the family's security has Canadians furious.
That's frustrating. That's definitely frustrating. I didn't tell them to move here.
But we did find one Canadian who sounds pretty pumped.
We're both kind of giddy about it.
The BC Premier is talking about himself and the Prime Minister, whom he spoke with today.
Canada's a cool place to be. We all are pretty happy about that as Canadians. People want to come here in large numbers. Now we have some Brexit examples that are coming our way. I think that's good news.
He even suggested he could find Harry a job. But this constitutional expert wants Canadians to know there are some jobs the Prince won't be getting.
Prince Harry will not be King of Canada. Prince Harry will not be Governor General. Prince Harry will perhaps have a celebrity profile. He will perhaps help Canadian charities raise money. He may engage in patronage activities and selling his brand. But we are not creating a Canadian royal family.
As for Canadian taxpayers getting stuck with those security bills, the Prime Minister's office won't comment. And the Finance Minister was distinctly less than giddy.
No, we haven't spent any time thinking about this issue.
Coming to Canada won't be an issue, however. A spokesperson for the Minister of Immigration says as royals, they don't need authorization to come here as visitors. But if the family wants to apply for permanent residency, they'll need to go through the same process as any commoner would. Catherine Cullen, CBC News, Ottawa.
So if Harry, Meghan, and Archie do move to Canada long term, what happens next?
You can't just be a royal and then decide not to be.
There are a lot of questions about what this move means for the future of the monarchy and, of course, what it means for Canada. We'll dig into some of those a little later on the program.
It's a closed-door meeting that had many talking.
You can't just be a royal and then decide not to be.
Queen Elizabeth II summoning senior royals to their Sandringham estate after the Duke and Duchess of Sussex stunned the world, announcing they're stepping back from their roles with the royal family.
The royal family really have a problem in dealing with junior members of the family being so popular.
The Queen calling the discussions constructive, adding she's supportive of Harry and Meghan's desire to be a young independent family. She also confirmed that Harry and Meghan will be living in Canada. In a rare personal statement, Her Majesty says in part, "These are complex matters for my family to resolve, and there is some more work to be done. But I have asked for final decisions to be reached in the coming days." The summit reflecting the Queen's desire to contain the fallout from Harry and Meghan's decision to become financially independent while splitting their time between Britain and North America. Royal analysts saying that decision could have a lot to do with racism Meghan Markle may have experienced while in Britain and from the British press.
We can see it with Meghan Markle and the way that she's been treated in the media. We know that this is a reality of the 21st century still. After 400 years of racism, you can't just overturn it overnight. It's something that we're going to have to work on.
Harry and Meghan have remained fairly quiet about the news, although Harry did release a joint statement with William ahead of today's meeting, slamming a report published by The Times that alleged bullying by Prince William. It's reported that Meghan was also in on the meeting via phone call from Canada. Now, the Queen says while she is supportive of them splitting their time between Canada and the UK, she would prefer them to be full-time members of the royal family. For City News, I'm Melissa Nicoli.
Solomon, who's standing by in Ottawa with more on this. Could come with a big price tag for Canadians as well. Evan, what do you think?
Well, after the quiet fury of the Queen in that statement, you know, when the Queen says we would prefer them to maintain their full duties, that is, you realize the extent of her fury there. That's a window in it. But this is a complex issue, and Canada's in the center of it. If Prince Harry and his wife Meghan decide to come to Canada, here are the questions. Who would pay for their security? There are estimates that the security could cost about $1.7 million. Now, remember, the British taxpayer pays for their security there, not the royal family. And when any royal visits Canada, the Canadian taxpayer, that's part of it. They're doing royal duties. No Canadian has a problem with that. But if they want to be independent, as they've said, and then they want to spend half their time here in Canada, who picks up that $1.7, $1.6 million tab? There has been a report in the British newspaper that says that Justin Trudeau has already assured the Queen that Canada will, but CTV has contacted the Prime Minister's office, and the Prime Minister's office has said no comment. Bill Morneau has said earlier in an interview, we have not made any decisions on this. So the first question will be, if they come, one, the cost, and then the second question is, you know, how do they jump the queue? You know, they can, a royal person can visit Canada, no problem. They get a lot of stuff covered and their sovereign fund pays for their income. But if they want to move here, then it becomes trickier. If they maintain their royal duties and their titles, that comes with certain Commonwealth requirements. If they're independent, there's security. What about immigration? There's no fast track for them to be permanent landed immigrants or permanent residents or even citizens. So those are real questions. They can visit for up to 6 months, Todd, but then what? So there's a lot of complexities for Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you think it would play here, Evan, in our country if Canadian taxpayers were on the hook for that $1+ million in security fees?
Well, I'll tell you, I just did a national talk radio show and I asked that question. There's an enormous amount of affection for Harry and Meghan. Let's face it, they're incredibly popular. What he's done, for example, for veterans with the Invictus Games, which he held in Toronto, very popular. She's lived here for 7 years in Toronto, so she's very popular. But it's a whole kind of different popularity when you're asking taxpayers to pay for people who are incredibly wealthy and to fork over $1.5 million for their personal security over a family squabble so they can be independently wealthy. I think taxpayers would revolt on this, and that's a political issue for Justin Trudeau to explain our Commonwealth obligations, our desire to make sure this couple is safe. We don't want them to be hurt. By the same token, we don't want to be funding someone. You know, you don't leave your mom and dad's home, Todd, and say, I'm independent, by the way, please pay for me. You can't do that.
Good point. We're going to show the folks who were at the Sandringham Summit, as it's called, of course, the Queen, Prince Charles, Prince William, Prince Harry, and on the phone from Canada was Meghan as well to take part in this Sandringham Summit to figure out the path forward. You know, I've heard speculation as well, Evan, about the possibility of down the line Prince Harry becoming Governor General of Canada. What do you make of that?
I think he's got a resume for a lot of jobs, Todd, and I think he's going to have no shortage of offers. But listen, it's going to be very tricky because Canadians have an uneasy relationship with the monarchy in different provinces and different places, number one. Number two, there's a sense of entitlement. Right? What do they get? They've already, she became part of that royal family. They're already in a crisis over there. And I think no one understands, even the Queen doesn't appear to understand, what it means to be financially independent. Are they still going to be doing royal duties while they're here? Are they still representing the crown? And if they're doing that part-time, there's going to be questions. Are they trying to cash in on their, quote, Sussex brand by working? So I think they have to figure out what this new role they're trying to pioneer is all about. And guess what? They're going to have to calibrate it with the Canadian citizen / taxpayer who may be on the hook.
Do you think as well one of the appeals, Evan, certainly on the part of the couple for Canada, is that our media can be perhaps a little bit less intrusive than they're used to with the British tabloids?
Yeah, I think they've enjoyed their time in Canada because we don't have that same kind of personal aggressive agenda. I think we shouldn't ever forget how personal this is for Prince Harry. I mean, his mother was literally hounded to death. And she didn't have security when she was in France, so when she died. So I think he's haunted by that. By the same token, this is an internal family squabble. And if you looked at the Queen's comments, she used the word family a lot. And you got to understand, do Canadians want to be dragged in to a family squabble as they're going shuttling back and forth? Living a pretty incredible life. Let's face it, the average person is not living the life of Harry and Meghan with the Jaguars and the beautiful events and staying in billionaire homes. Hey, they're celebrities. They do good work. But, you know, the question on most people's minds will be, why don't they pay for their own security? They're rich. Now, again, the taxpayers in Britain pay for their security there. But when they're here, I think the big question is, who picks up the tab? And I don't think Canadians are willing to do it so much.
I think Prince Harry, Evan, is worth about $40 million currently, in addition to whatever else he may be getting, whatever else Meghan might be getting as well.
Yeah, that's kind of your level of stuff, Todd, you know, and that's salaries that you would know. No, but I mean, this is a lot of money. This is a lot of money for people. And I just think, again, I think they've got to calibrate this. This is a human story. These are very popular people. The monarchy's very popular, but man, oh man, Justin Trudeau's got to recalibrate this. He can't look. Remember, when Tim Horton said, we'll give you free coffee for life, that campaign to Harry and Meghan, it backfired because people were saying, you don't even pay your employees, you're fighting them on minimum wage. Now you're giving this rich couple free coffee for life. So, you know, your affection for the monarchy has to be calibrated through a let them eat cake kind of snobbery, which always comes with this kind of thing.
Evan Solomon, the host of Power Play, joining us from Ottawa. He's going to have a lot more on his show coming up later on today. Thank you for this, Evan.
Thanks, Todd.
They came here because they felt safe. They came here because we have a lot to offer. And if they want to come back and put down roots here, I'm sure I could find something for Harry to do. And the film industry is booming in British Columbia, so I'm sure Meghan could get on with one of the great, maybe Riverdale, who knows? She'd be good.
It looks like Prince Harry and his wife Meghan will indeed be living in Canada part-time. That was part of an announcement from the Queen today after senior royals met at her estate, one of her estates. In a statement released earlier, the Queen said, "My family and I are entirely supportive of Harry and Meghan's desire to create a new life as a young family. Although we would have preferred them to remain full-time working members of the royal family," she goes on to say, "we respect and understand their wish to live a more independent life as a family while remaining a valued part of my family. It has therefore been agreed that there will be a period of transition in which the Sussexes will spend time in Canada and the UK. These are complex matters for my family to resolve, and there is some more work to be done." So what could this new arrangement mean for Canada? Could Canadian taxpayers be on the hook for royal security and housing? Mel Kapp is a former Canadian High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, and also a former clerk of the Privy Council. He joins us now from Toronto. Hi, Mr. Kapp. Great to see you again. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Pleasure, Vashi.
The Queen released a statement today saying, kind of confirming that there will be a transition period where Prince Harry and Meghan will spend time in Canada and the UK. Does any of this surprise you? What's your reaction to it?
Surprise, I don't know. I can't be surprised by the royals anymore. I think it is interesting, though. I mean, the Queen has gone through challenges to the family extensively over her whole life. Remember, her uncle abdicated, and she saw her father, who really never thought he would ascend to the throne, become king. And all of these challenges, including the divorces that her children went through, and the challenge of when Princess Diana died. I mean, those are all things that she had to deal with as a grandmother, as a mother, as a niece, as a daughter, as a family. And she's acting both as a granny, as Harry would call her, and as the Queen.
Based on your time in the UK, I mean, what we've read a lot of so far is that both Prince Harry and Meghan seem to be overwhelmed. I don't know if that's the right word, but there's a ton of coverage of their every move, as well as particular focus on Meghan. What is the environment, the media environment there, or the public consumption of this kind of stuff, based on your experience?
Insatiable. The public in the United Kingdom is absolutely smitten and overwhelmed themselves by the royals. So they look for every opportunity. And the paparazzi, remember, I mean, when Diana was unfortunately died in Paris, it was a result of an incident with the paparazzi. And, I had seen in very relaxed and leisure time the Prince of Wales and his boys playing polo. And just reams of photographers all over the place just to get a photo, hoping, I'm sure, that they wanted them to fall off their ponies. But it is a brutal contact sport in the United Kingdom.
So we have seen a number throughout the day on the network and elsewhere. I've seen a number of people who, primarily reporters who are based there, talk about some of the backlash and some of the anger that a number of Britons are feeling towards these two for wanting to not spend their time as a royal. Does that make sense to you?
You mean they resent them wanting to have a life?
That's pretty much it.
No,
yeah.
It doesn't make sense to me, but neither do I think they're wrong. You remember what the Queen said when she ascended to the throne, when her father passed, George VI. She said that throughout her life, it would be her duty to serve. And so, yes, she's a granny, but also she's the Queen. Yes, he is Harry, but he's also the Duke of Sussex. So it's very difficult to balance these kinds of conflicting requirements of life. And so he had grown up as Prince Harry. She became instantaneously the Duchess of Sussex. Very, very difficult to accommodate to that.
When we're talking about Canada and the two of them possibly residing here for a big chunk of time, what is your understanding of the role of the Canadian government? Will we be paying for security? What I know we don't know the for sure's right now, but just based on your experience, again, what would you think might happen?
So what typically happens is, certainly for official business, when the royals are in Canada, it is the government of Canada who deals with them and covers their security costs. That is for official business. For unofficial business, it's much more ambiguous. So the Metropolitan Police in London have the Royal Security Service, and they look after the royals everywhere. But remember, we had Andrew going to school here at Lakeview for 4 years. So the RCM police are very accustomed to dealing with this personal life of royals in Canada. And so, yes, we are not going to let something happen to the sixth in line to the throne. He's sixth in line to become the King of Canada. We're not going to let something happen to him. Is this a big security cost? I don't really think so.
I think it's reportedly around $1.7 million annually. I guess at least some of what we're hearing from viewers is a bit of resentment to the idea, and it depends who the viewer is, I'll say that, but a bit of resentment to the idea that because of a decision they're making, not one that is an official visit or something like that, because of a decision they're making, our taxpayers, people in our country will be on the hook for that. What would you say to them?
Well, I would say $1.7 million is not a huge cost in the grand scheme of things. Put this in context. We provide that kind of protection for people who are internationally protected persons visiting Canada all the time, whether it's the Aga Khan or other royals from other countries, or just people living here who are internationally protected persons. Barack Obama is coming to Toronto to speak in a couple of weeks. The RCM police are not going to let anything happen to him. They will provide protection. He's an internationally protected person.
Does it surprise you that they'd choose, before I let you go, that they choose Canada as a place they want to spend a bulk of their time?
Not in the least. Meghan Markle has been, the Duchess of Sussex, has been very clear that so long as Donald Trump is president of the United States, she wants to be able to visit her family in the United States, but she will not move back to the United States. Therefore, Canada is a very comfortable accommodation.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Cap. Pleasure to have you as always.
Pleasure, Bessie. Bye.
We obviously are always looking to make sure that as a member of the Commonwealth that we play a role. We have not had any discussions on that subject at this time.
We're back with the Power Panel, Melissa, Dan, Matthew, and JP. That was Finance Minister Bill Morneau, who was asked this morning about who is going to pay for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's security when they begin living in Canada. That is confirmed, by the way. The Queen put out a statement earlier today after meeting with her family, saying there will be a period of transition in which the Sussexes will spend time in Canada and the UK. I'm going to begin with our royal correspondent here, JP Tasker.
Self-described.
Yeah, self-described royal. Okay, so people are consuming this news a lot right now. Definitely the most read story on our website. They are a lot of interest in whether or not Canadians are going to be footing the bill.
Right. So the question is, as you saw Morneau kind of dance around there, whether we'll be on the hook for paying for security when they do move here to Canada part-time. Most estimates peg it as at least $1.7 million a year, and that's to replace or give them an equivalent of what they have right now in the United Kingdom, which is provided by the Metropolitan Police Service, Scotland Yard. They have a special branch that deals with that. We don't really have the same arrangement here in this country, obviously. When they do come to Canada in the past, royals, we have footed the bill for security. When the Queen came in 2010, for example, she did a 9-day tour of this country. It cost over $2 million just for that short stint. Same for when Kate and Will came a year later. It was roughly the same amount of money to provide them with the RCMP security detail. Now, the question is whether the UK will kick in any funds. Right now, they've already said, the royals, Harry and Meghan have said they will opt out of the sovereign fund, which is the taxpayer pool of money that they dip into every year to pay for their expenses, or most of their expenses. It's $140 million a year that all the royals have access to, and Prince Harry and Meghan have taken their cut. They don't want that anymore, so they're opting out, but they're still going to get funds called something from the Duchy of Cornwall, which is a private business. What does this all mean? It's a private business that the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, owns outright, and he makes a considerable amount of money from that company, which owns like 140,000 acres in England. So he pays his kids from that fund. There is a possibility they could use the money they get from that to cover the security costs they might incur here in Canada, but it's not sure how that's all going to shake out. It's probably going to take a bit of diplomacy between the UK and Canada to kind of settle on how they'll pay for that. But I spoke to the PMO today, the Privy Council office, the Heritage Department. Everyone's like, we're not commenting on this. Don't bother. Don't ask again until we come to you. You know?
It was interesting because I saw JP send out an email with all of their responses, Dan, and it's true. It wasn't even like we'll gloss over this. It was just we have no comment. We'll refer you somewhere else. We have no comment. We'll refer you somewhere else. Why would the government be hesitating to say one way or the other, even if they can't conclusively say whether they will pay, whether they're willing to pay?
Well, I think at this juncture, it's a little too early to be speculating on exactly whether or not Canadian taxpayers are going to have to.
Is it? They're already here.
Of course it is. I mean, it's far too early. We know today, only this afternoon, that they will move to Canada. Previous to that, it was North America. Right. I think it's, personally, as a monarchist, someone who supports the monarchy, I think them moving here would be a great thing. I think if a national referendum was held to decide whether or not some people as effortlessly cool as Prince Harry and Meghan should move to Canada, Canadians would probably support it in an overwhelming majority. Now, whether or not we cover their security costs, whether or not taxpayers are up for the bill of them moving here, I think that's a question that's really answered by whether or not they're going to serve as part-time royals here in Canada and undertaking official duties and as members of a royal family. Even in a part-time perspective, that I would be completely fine with having to see Canadian taxpayers cover the cost of security in that instance. If they're completely private citizens with no official role, I think it's very difficult to make a case that they deserve of any kind of public financing.
That's a good point. Matthew, it seemed to me like they were quitting royal life. Like that, I mean, and I know that there's technical terms and proper ways that JP knows to say it. I don't know them, but it seems like they're stepping away from that life. That's why they're coming to Canada. Is Dan correct that if they are going to be just acting as private citizens, taxpayers should stay out of it? But if they are going to perform royal functions, it's a different story.
I think that's a pretty fair comment. I find these issues really tough, even when I was a member of Parliament, because you would get questions in the House of Commons about the Prime Minister's security detail, both with Justin Trudeau and with Stephen Harper. I saw it happen to both of them. And I think there's a weird space when it comes to social license from the public about these types of costs. I think there's a surprising amount of acceptance for it, but there's also always that hesitation, which is why I think you ran into a little bit of a wall reaching out to the PMO, because I think ultimately there's a lot of unknowns too, right? I mean, I think the thing that jumped to my mind thinking about the costs wasn't just the manpower, but also the thought that came to my mind was Mar-a-Lago. When President Trump started making that the Southern White House or whatever the heck they're calling it, the costs of dealing with New York, of dealing with Florida for the Secret Service and building the infrastructure around that, what does that mean? If they're living in Ottawa, certainly I would imagine the costs are going to be lower than if they decide to go live in cottage country north of Toronto. So there's all these unknowns. I think it's a pretty difficult discussion. And quite frankly, as someone coming from Quebec, I'm sure the Bloc Québécois would more than be happy to ask questions about the cost for royal security when Parliament comes back. But it's a funny issue. And I think the Brits seem to be having the same debate. And I think the ball's going to be crossing the pond a couple of times before it's all said and done.
Good call. Melissa, what do you think?
I think it's very different when you're talking about paying for travel for elected officials who are elected by the people in their country. I don't think it's very reasonable for Canadians to expect or to be expected to foot the bill of royals who are not performing royal duties at the cost of a royal visit when they've chosen to live here. And when a 35-year-old man decides to become financially independent, that means he decides to be financially independent. It means move out of the house and not have me pay for your new house or the security around your new house. I think that's a completely reasonable expectation for Prime Minister and I think from Canadians. And I think that there's a lot of pollsters that are going to go out in the field and start to rejig those numbers about what people feel about the monarchy or republicanism in this country. And I think that reignites the debate.
To be fair, JP, they haven't said themselves that they're expecting those costs to be covered. In fact, most of at least what I've read about why they were leaving is to gain that independence. I mean, I know we're kind of joking about it, but they don't want to be funded off the public purse to the same degree. I'm not clear on to what degree they still might be, but it seems like that's the move that they're making at least.
Yeah, they said they want to give that up. They want to take a step back. They want to have more of a private life. They want to divorce themselves from the public eye, and that they understand that means giving up all the money that they get from the public in Britain. But security is a different pool of money. It's a different thing. It's a different, it requires government coordination. They can't just go out and hire some mall security guard to take care of them on Vancouver Island, right? It has to be part of the government apparatus. It has to be the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. It's in the title there to take care of them. So maybe they'll reimburse some of the funds that come from it, but they have been clear to this point. One of the few details we've actually learned from this whole thing from them themselves is that they do not want to take public dollars anymore. So it's going to be a delicate dance. We'll see how it goes. But
except maybe Canadian dollars. We'll see, right?
Yeah. But it will draw some attention to our country, I think.
It already has. Yeah. It's everywhere. Anyway, I'm sure we'll be talking about this again, but I have to leave it there tonight. Thanks so much to our Power panel. Thanks to Melissa Lantsman, Dan Moulton, Matthew Dubé, and John Paul Tasker. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.
Now let's go deeper on our top story, the royal crisis that led to today's family summit and an extraordinary statement from the Queen.
My family and I can't recall a statement in which she clearly expresses her feelings so much.
Feelings like disappointment that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex intend to step back as senior royals, and regret that the bombshell news was dropped last week without warning.
You can't just be a royal and then decide not to be.
The couple's plans have stirred skepticism, even blame from a press that has, at times, fixated on Meghan Markle's biracial background. This from last fall's ITV documentary.
I never thought that this would be easy, but I thought it would be fair.
The British Empire faces an extraordinary crisis.
Now, the monarchy has seen a storm like this before. In the 1930s, King Edward VIII fell in love with an American, even gave up the throne for her. But the monarchy was on firmer ground then. These are different times, and the question today, what does it all mean for the royal family's future? Okay, now Richard Fitzwilliams is a royal commentator with deep insight into the nuts and bolts of British society. Richard, you're also accustomed to decoding royal language and intention, so tell us, what did you read into the Queen's statement that the rest of us might have missed?
Well, I am not sure that a very large number of people missed what the Queen meant, simply because there has been the most extraordinary media circus worldwide. There's fascination about what was going to happen at the summit today. The Queen made it absolutely clear that she is only too pleased to back something that is unprecedented, Harry and Meghan stepping down from royal duties as senior royals, but continuing them in an independent way. I would say that it's been a hellish 2 months for the royal family with the Prince Andrew debacle, relatively recent, and this last week has been absolutely ghastly. But the hope is that this will provide, certainly for the future, perhaps a template that others who are unhappy with royal duties conventionally may choose to use.
I am curious to know, do you think that the Queen had any choice but to set Harry and Meghan free in a way?
Frankly, I don't think so, because there would have been a backlash possibly in the form of some form of kiss and tell interview. That is something that was the nuclear button. I mention it because it was on practically every front page of a newspaper today. Equally, she is fond of her grandson. She recognizes that he and Meghan have tremendous problems in adjusting to royal life and are pressurized and unhappy, as they made clear in the ITV documentary after their Southern African visit. So she compromised.
So you talk about sort of creating a new model for royals going future. Is that ultimately good or bad for the royal family as an institution?
Well, I think it's following royals in Europe to some extent, just as marrying non-royals did, and also the abolition of the male child taking precedence did. But of course, it depends on the individuals, and it will depend on how they handle it. And Harry and Meghan must be well aware that every single thing they do will be microscopically examined from now on, especially having, I have to say, mishandled the last week in an extraordinary way and putting the monarch under a lot of pressure. I think that we have a very, very interesting times ahead. I just hope they make the best of them, and they have remarkable talents, and that they can spread what they're really good at is a charitable activism around the Commonwealth and elsewhere.
Well, I suppose the media circus will continue then. Richard Fitzwilliams, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Now, as we said, this move by Harry and Meghan raises all sorts of questions about how a new arrangement with the monarchy would work. So now we turn to Omid Scobie. He covers the royals with a special emphasis on the younger members of the family, and he's got some answers for us.
When Harry and Meghan say they want financial independence, they mean they no longer want to take from the sovereign grant, which is parts provided by the government and the UK taxpayer. Of course, that means that they do have to take their money from elsewhere. They'll be earning that money, but they'll also be looking for father, Prince Charles, to still provide some funding from the Duchy of Cornwall, which is his estate. Well, despite this big change to Harry and Meghan's working model, we'll still see them at Trooping the Colour, we'll still see them at all the big royal gatherings. We'll also see them supporting the Queen and doing work in her name, whether that's overseas tours, they're still coming, and of course engagements here in the UK and around the world and across the Commonwealth. So for them, the work does continue. This just allows them to take on other work that doesn't necessarily follow the agenda of the royal family. Well, one of the hardest things for Harry and Meghan has been basically trying to get jobs like normal people. It's not the done thing in the royal family. Sophie and Edward tried to do this in the late 90s and it ended in disaster. The Queen had to buy them out of their jobs. Well, Harry and Meghan still have Frogmore Cottage here in the UK as their base. That doesn't change. The UK is still very much home for them. But of course, Canada's now in the picture. We know they've stayed in Vancouver on Vancouver Island in the past, and that will continue to be part of the picture temporarily. However, it's not known where else they'll live in Canada moving forward. Could there be a place in Toronto? Meghan loves it there. It'll certainly be high up on the list. So it's actually a huge bonus for the royal family to now have Harry and Meghan as ambassadors for the royal family living in Canada. We don't often see members of the royal family living in other Commonwealth countries. This, in fact, will help grow the brand of the firm moving forward. And for Harry and Meghan, it's a special place for them. There have never been senior members of the royal family who have stepped away from those duties and taken on their own jobs, funded themselves, but kept one foot in the House of Windsor to continue doing royal engagements. It's why it's taken so long to reach this point. We've yet to hear about how they'll be funded moving forwards. Of course, they still need protection officers. Will Canada be stepping in to help pay for that? How about Frogmore Cottage? It was taxpayer funded for the renovations. Will they be repaying some of that back to the sovereign grant? There are a lot of unanswered questions, and they're ones that I'm keen to get answers to. But I think most of all, the thing that we should be celebrating at the moment is Harry and Meghan have actually found the happiness and the positive that they wanted in this deal, and hopefully their lives will be very different moving forward.
Now, we want to give you the chance to weigh in on these potential new Canadians. You can head to our Instagram story, try out our virtual red chair, and answer today's question. Meanwhile, Nick Purdon set out today with his actual red chair to put that same question to folks on the street. Here's what you had to say.
We were just talking about this at breakfast.
That's a hot potato in England right now.
Oh my. Meghan, Harry, Canada?
Yes, please come. They're bold, you know. They're making a statement, and they're just so in love, which I love.
Meghan, Harry, Canada? Question mark. I don't really care. It doesn't make any difference to me if they come or not, to be honest.
Meghan, Harry, Canada? Absolutely. Absolutely. Come on over. They're one of us anyways. And they're blaming Meghan, and they shouldn't blame Meghan. She's giving him the courage to say...
So if I was the Queen, I'd be a little bit confused or curious as to why they would want to leave the royal family.
I feel like Meghan got a lot of negative media attention. Harry's probably not going to become king, so he's getting out while he can. And I appreciate them becoming financially dependent. I think it's good.
If I could say something to Harry and Meghan, I would say, welcome to Canada. It'd be great to have you here.
I don't think the Canadian government should help them. They have enough help as it is.
I think it's pretty much high time that somebody pulls away from the royal family, make it on their own. I think that's really a progressive move on their parts. So I'm happy about that.
What do I think about them? I think that it must be awful to have your life under constant scrutiny. Actually, I feel sorry for them in that way, and I think they should be able to live wherever they want to live. Oh, I'm done?
If I could say anything to Meghan and Harry, I'd say just stay in Britain.
Oh.
If I could say something to Meghan and Harry, I would say, crack on. Crack on, you beautiful couple. Nice.
Okay, so for your dose of everything royal, hey, you can subscribe to our newsletter, The Royal Fascinator. Lands in your inbox every other Friday. Sign up at cbc.ca/Royal Fascinator.
Make it on their own. I think that's really a progressive move on their parts.
So there you hear the reaction, and it's mixed.
to the story that's shaking up the royal family as we know it and certainly captivating much of the world. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Prince Harry and his wife Meghan, getting the green light from the Queen yesterday after the Sandringham summit to step back from their royal roles, embrace a more progressive role as they expressed a desire, and to come part-time to Canada. There are so many questions about how exactly this is going to work. So this is your chance to put them to us directly. In London, we have for you our Renee Filippone, and beside Renee, royal commentator Katie Nicol, whom we know so well from a number of royal conversations, including the marriage of the Sussexes. Good morning, Renee. Good morning, Katie.
Morning.
Good morning. I just want to explain to people what we're doing. Yes, we're live on CBC News Network, but we're also streaming this conversation on CBC News Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. It is live, and you can join our chat to come at facebook.com/CBC News. You can leave your questions in the comment section. You can watch at youtube.com/CBC News as well, and leave your questions in the chat there. So let's get started. We're going to get to viewer questions right away because we have them stacked up already, such as the interest level in this story. But Renee, let me get to you because that was mostly reaction from people in British Columbia where they spent their holiday. Again, mixed to whether they might be moving to Canada, moving to BC. As you've covered this there, what's your sense of reaction in the UK? Renee.
Well, the story is really being painted in the UK media as sort of Harry and Meghan got their way. The Queen, she really didn't want them to go, but she sort of gave in to what they wanted, that they had no choice. I've seen headlines in some of the papers, saying, it's basically Meghan's way or the highway. So here we are, it looks like the Queen is saying, yes, you can get your transition period, you can move to Canada, but there still really is a lot of the blame game being played about, what is really behind this? Was this Meghan who pushed Harry out? Was this a decision between them? Was it something the royal family did? Was it something the media did to make it so inhospitable here for the couple to live? So despite the fact we're sort of getting more detail, still a lot of detail is missing when it comes to this story. This seems like it all happened very quickly and people are trying to follow the ball here. But again, we're still on that, why has this happened moment?
Well,
and here we are, what is it, 6-7 days later?
The woman beside you can probably fill in much of that detail. What is your sense? Because one of the last times we spoke, Katie, there we were in Windsor talking about this delightful, joyous wedding day and how warmly the royal family had welcomed Meghan Markle into the royal fold. What has happened, and to what do you most ascribe this change?
Well, I so remember that moment being with you, Heather. The sun was shining. I mean, it was the most magical day in Windsor. And I really feel that there was a sense of hope and optimism, a great amount of goodwill from not just the British public towards this couple as they started their married life together, but around the world. And I think it's incredibly sad how it has all come to this.
Yes.
I think, there have been some not so subtle hints, perhaps warning signs that we, the media, should have perhaps picked up on better. Perhaps the royal family should have picked up on better. I mean, I do have sympathy for the Duchess of Sussex because marrying into the royal family is not an easy thing to do.
Right.
The British press can be tough. I think there are certainly examples of times where they haven't made it easy for them.
So blame to go around.
It feels like an early stage to be exiting. I just feel like this is such a dramatic decision. This sort of feels really end of the line time, and I think perhaps the Queen was trying to leave, or is still trying to leave, the door open. There is a sense that no one really wants this to be the end. We wish the couple well. We hope they have a wonderful time in Canada. But, we don't want this to be the end of Meghan and Harry in the United Kingdom.
In the royal family. Okay, pausing there. I've brought to bring in some viewers who are watching who have questions. Tintin or Tintin, depending, I'm not sure English or French, but writing to us saying this. There are two parts to this question. Where will they live? And I want to begin with this, Renee, and also particularly for you, Katie, because this is really the big question you hear here in Canada. Why do Canadians have to pay for the security? We did not ask these two here. There's a real reluctance over funding. So, Renee, you know, I don't know what you're hearing in terms of anything there where they will live, but Katie, the whole question of who will pay for this is a big one for Canadians.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about the conversation about who will pay, and we're hearing a lot of that in reaction from the Canadian people, and often that falls in line their position on this, whether or not they sort of supported the monarchy in the first place, and that will sort of show you where they sit on that. Again, as I mentioned, all of this happened so quickly, it's really unclear right now what bills the Canadian government would be picking up, why, how this will all work. We've heard from the Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, yesterday, you know, he's saying it's early stages, we have no idea. You know, we've heard from the Prime Minister. So when it comes to the level of cost this is going to incur on the Canadian government, it really is unclear at this moment. I think that's all going to be part of the discussions going forward. And maybe Katie can talk to it a bit when we're talking about security. You know, how big of an expense is this? How much is the cost?
It's very hard to put a price on it, actually, because it's the one thing that the Palace and the Met police simply won't comment on. I mean, it might be $1 million a year. I mean, that's a figure you sort of see in the papers. We really don't know if that is incredibly accurate or not. So I think two things to say about the funding. One is we don't know what's going to happen with it. Two is it's always been a sticking point, I think, for the British public that if they're not going to be here, then why on earth should the British taxpayer be funding their round-the-clock protection? If they want to go out and be financially independent, then people here, I think, believe that that should extend to their protection. But our Home Secretary and you know, I think a lot of people also see this point, you know, they are the biggest royals on the planet at the moment. I mean, look at the acres of media coverage, and the idea that they won't have any protection is unthinkable because they, you know, they would be targets.
I mean,
so
Canadians, I think,
understand. There's going to have to be a resolution found to this.
A resolution value. Canadians understand that when royals are here in this country on official business, Canadians pick up the tab. But this is a whole different status, and there is a question, and indeed I think a reluctance, a strong one on the part of Canadians to pay for that. So pause on that note for just a second. If you're watching us on CBC News Network, we have to just pause as we become for our financial independence. So just hold on for just a second. But if you're streaming us right now on YouTube, on Facebook, or Twitter, we're going to keep taking your questions in just a moment. So stay with us. We'll be back with more with Renee and with Katie in just a second. Oh, this is so cool. Hello, people to whom we're streaming. I didn't realize that I wasn't actually stopping. We continue on. Hello. So let's continue on with Delia's question. Delia Freeman on YouTube. This is really interesting, Katie, because you get a sense, you know, we've talked about how it's Team Crown versus Team Megxit. Delia speaks to this very strong division. It is shameful the way this pair has taken and in return treated our queen so extremely disrespectfully. They had an extremely expensive wedding and given a beautiful home by Her Majesty, and now people feel like they're just, you know, turning their back on. And again, it points to what Renee's been talking about with me this morning, and that is the resentment directed largely at Meghan personally. Do you get a sense, Katie, in your writing and in your speaking to people, that people think this is just the Queen is really, she's being disrespected here?
Yes, I think there is a sense that she feels disrespected. I don't actually think it's so much in what the couple are asking for. I think most people, and the Queen included, who, remember, is a very forward-thinking woman. She's lived through so much. She will understand that having slipped down to 6th in line to the throne, Harry might want a bit more independence. But I think it's how they went about it that has been so hurtful and so disappointing, to have issued that statement without letting the Queen know. Yes, I know there were embryonic stage talks going on over Christmas, but the Queen wasn't expecting that statement. And as we are seeing in the fallout, really the couple weren't ready to make that statement because so much is still not yet mapped out, and I think that could have saved a lot of face on their part. I think it could have saved the Queen a lot of hurt. But yes, there is definitely a feeling here that that the Queen has been disrespected, and really, does she deserve this? One of the things that I've certainly noticed as I've reported on the couple, and as you know, I've written a book about Harry and Meghan, is just how much the Queen personally bent the rules for them as a couple. You know, I always remember Meghan going, when she was still Meghan Markle, being invited to Sandringham for Christmas. You know, that was unthinkable years ago. That never happened for Kate Middleton.
Katie,
she had
I just
to
have
wait
to interrupt you there.
She was a fully fledged member of the firm.
Just hold on for one moment, because Katie, as we speak, I'm just interrupting Katie as we speak online because we want to welcome you back as you're watching us on CBC News Network. So continuing questions with Renee Filippone, who's our correspondent in London, and royal commentator Katie Nicoli. And we were just talking about how some people feel and some of the questions that are coming into us as we live stream this on CBC News Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And you can join in at facebook.com/CBC News, or you can watch on youtube.com/CBC News and leave your questions in the chat there as well. We had a question from Delia about, you know, feeling like the Queen has really been wronged by the treatment of her grandson and his wife. And Katie was just saying, we were just reminiscing about how the Queen invited Meghan Markle, when she was then Meghan Markle, to family events even before they were officially, you know, married, which was unheard of at the time.
Yeah, it was, Heather, and I think, you know, the point being that the Queen has really pushed those boundaries. I think she's done a huge amount to accommodate Harry and Meghan and their wishes. And even if you look at that wedding, and, you know, we covered that together, it was such an incredible day, but it was so different to any previous royal wedding that we'd seen. And, you know, that was all signed off by the Queen. She allowed them to have the day that they wanted. She allowed them to live where they wanted. She allowed them to create their own household, to break away from Kensington Palace, to have their own team of staff. I mean, really, everything they've wanted, they have been given. So I don't think anyone can point the finger at the Queen particularly for not accommodating them. I think the difficulty has been the couple being in the spotlight. Meghan particularly struggling with this new royal role, which is not easy. But clearly behind the scenes, they have been very, very unhappy.
Renee, let me bring in a question for someone who goes by Misfit of Science, who's commenting on YouTube and watching us there, and good morning to you, talking about the mixed reaction. This person writes, "Stay in England where you belong." There is a certain sentiment about, you know, you're welcome to visit, but please don't come and live here. But interestingly, I commend you for actually wanting to work a day in your life. So that's more directed at Harry, Katie. And let me bring this one back to you. If Meghan goes back to acting or whatever she may want to do to be financially independent, what would Harry do? I mean, he's a military man. Would he be at home with Archie? Or what could you see him doing in terms of being financially independent?
Well, you know, these are all questions that we're waiting to get answers to, and it's not really very clear. I mean, I wouldn't knock Harry or Meghan, certainly for that respect, for being work shy. I mean, when you look at what they do in terms of the court circular and engagements here in a typical day, you know, they're out on engagements, they're seeing their charities, they're working with their patronages. You know, they're really busy, and you know, Meghan particularly is incredibly hardworking. But and we don't know what's happening, but if they're going to give up royal duties, or perhaps only spend several months of the year doing royal duties, what are they going to do the rest of the time? And I think that is the crux of these crisis talks, because if it's going to be about going out and being commercial and launching commercial enterprises and, for want of a better phrase, cashing in, then that's the sticky point for the palace. That's when things could get really quite murky and quite difficult.
It's interesting. I'll just one more question, but Andre Stevens on Facebook commenting on that. If they want to be financially independent, they should be paying for the security costs. So that goes back to what we were talking about earlier.
That's what I said. That's what we said. That's what we were saying earlier.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And Sandra Persaud commenting, "Wow, nice, but who's going to pay for the security?" So obviously costs are a big issue on this point here in Canada. Yeah. I want to go back. This will be my last question. And then Renee, you're going to carry on, aren't you, with all of this live streaming with more questions. But coming back to, hold right on with me here. This is another big issue for Canadians. We had this poll, one of our newspapers, the National Post, reporting on whether Canadians would want Harry to be Governor General. And of course, in Canada, we've had Canadian-born Governor General since 1952 in Vincent Massey. There's not a big appetite in this country to go back to a British-born Governor General, I don't think. But what is the likelihood, what chance, this is Pat Lawson's question, what chance might there be for Harry to be Governor General?
It doesn't seem very likely. People say it would be sort of a step back when it comes to sovereignty for Canada. Yes, I think Harry will continue on with his position within the Commonwealth, likely making trips and representing it. I think it would be a very interesting position, or a very interesting call for the Prime Minister to make, because he's the one who recommends to the Queen who the next Governor General is, to take someone like Harry and put them in that position of power, when for so long we've had, Canadians who have these exemplary records of service within our own country, serving as that position. We are an independent, sovereign country. It's not impossible. I highly doubt, despite the fact that some people say they would support it, whether or not in the end, if it was actually to come to pass and people thought it through, whether it would be something that people would back.
He is so popular. I mean, people would like to have him enroll, but do you think, Katie, I mean, really, if he's wanting to step back from royal duties, would he want to be the Queen's representative in another country? I mean, as his job. I mean,
I was just about to say it wouldn't make any sense.
No.
I mean, that really would point out we don't want to be in England anymore. I'll do the same thing. I'll just do it in Canada. And I can't see that happening.
I wish I could be listening in directly, but I have to keep working away here. I'm going to let you two continue with so many questions that are stacking up for you from people who are watching as we live stream. Renee, thank you so much. Katie, great to see you, and thank you very much as well. We'll end our conversation.
All right, so we are continuing our conversation here on social media, streaming on YouTube and Facebook, and taking a look at all these questions, all these unknowns right now when it comes to the past week and the royal news and this shock announcement by Harry and Meghan. So let's just jump right into it. Katie Nicoli is my guest. She is the royal editor for Vanity Fair. And let's just start from the beginning here. We have a question right now from Marlene Correa. She says, is it true that Harry was forced to make the announcement on social media because the tabloids had a leak? They were going to put out some sort of statement. He may have tried to contact the Queen. Is that false? Could there be any truth to that?
What we understand happened was the Sun newspaper got wind of the couple's decision to move to Canada. Apparently they had that story for about 10 days or so before they actually printed it. Then there was that very strange visit to Canada House. Renee and I were there together. We both commented, didn't we, on how unusual this was. Didn't feel like a regular engagement. And then the next morning, splash, on the front page, we're off again to Canada. By which point, the Sussexes obviously felt that they were losing control of the narrative, this story that they'd sat on for quite a long time, this idea that they were moving to Canada was suddenly out of their control. And that clearly was the catalyst for them then going nuclear, as the papers have said, and issuing that statement. What we understand they didn't do was tell the Queen and senior members of the royal family that they were issuing that statement. But this idea that the whole thing came as a complete shock to the royal family isn't quite accurate, because I was told by a very reliable and senior source at the palace that there were early stage talks. So when Meghan and Harry were in Sussex, in Canada over the Christmas holidays, they were having conversations with members of the royal family about this idea. So it's a bit of both. There were talks, but they were nowhere near as ready as they were meant to be before announcing this plan.
It was interesting. I was in Canada House. It was actually, since I've moved here, my first sort of official royal event that I covered with members of the royal family. And there were, seasoned royal correspondents there who kept asking, do you think they're going to make an announcement today while they're here about them moving to Canada? That didn't happen, but it was literally hours later. So that definitely was sort of the buzz, despite it took them.
Well, apparently after that engagement, when I actually asked a member of the Sussexes camp, is this the prequel to something bigger? And I was told no. Apparently their key aides tried to talk the couple out of pressing send on that statement, because I think they knew
it would turn out this way,
that this was going to create a huge backlash for them.
We have a couple questions, and maybe I'll just address these as best as we can, about the ability of Meghan and Harry to work in Canada, immigration sorts of issues. As being the Queen's son, Queen's grandson, the Queen, has a right. She's not a Canadian citizen, but she has a special sort of status in the Commonwealth country that doesn't sort of work for Harry himself. It's likely if he wanted to spend a significant amount of time and get a job, he would have to apply for some sort of visa. There are different types of visas, being, an investor visa where you buy into a business. There's also the opportunity, if they're only there in and out frequently, they can be more visitor status in Canada. Meghan clearly had a visa before when she was working there. There are also talks from, sort of immigration lawyers we've heard from that say, there is an opportunity when it comes to the Minister of Immigration, special situations. Again, as we've been mentioning, all this has happened so fast.
This has not
been worked out. And we know at this point it feels like the Canadian government officials are still saying very little. It's our understanding there are conversations being had, and
Yes.
I'm sure those details will come about. But what kind of immigration status or visa they're going to have will depend on what exactly they intend to do while they're in Canada, which we don't know.
Irene, I just jump in that there's also real tax implications.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm not a tax expert or an immigration expert, but it is my understanding that if they do spend a significant chunk of the year, more than I think of 100 days in Canada, then they'll have to pay tax on their earnings in Canada as well as back here in the UK. And for Meghan, she'll also have to pay tax
in the US.
So that is for her a triple tax whammy, and for Harry a double tax whammy. And yes, they could be earning a lot of money, but they could be paying an awful lot to the taxman too.
A question coming about contributions. So what do you think, from Max Foxwell on Twitter, would they contribute to Canada?
Well, Max, that's a really great question. I mean, wow, where to start? I suppose it depends if and how much they're going to do in terms of the Commonwealth. And I think possibly the reason they've opted for Canada over America, obviously where Meghan's mother is because Canada is a Commonwealth country. It fits well with their roles as the Commonwealth. They're not saying they don't want to carry out royal duties or work and continue that work that they started in the Commonwealth. So to me, Canada seems like a great place. What are they going to bring to it? A whole lot of attention, I suspect.
Well, it's interesting. We heard from the Premier of British Columbia yesterday. He was talking about he's kind of giddy at the idea if they do tend to settle in Vancouver Island, like where we believe they spent Christmas.
Yes.
Talking about how proud he was of people in the area to give them some space.
Keeping it stum. I mean, you Canadians keep a secret very well.
But, there does seem to be a lot of interest at this point going forward with this now becoming official. It'll be interesting for me to see if that sort of privacy level continues, how long this sort of fever around this decision will last. Do you have any sense of?
Well, I think taking a 7-week break on a private island at a billionaire's house is very different to making somewhere your home. They are the most famous people on the planet right now. This idea that they're going to be able to escape the spotlight, I don't see it happening in Canada. I don't see it happening anywhere in the world. There is so much interest on them. And, I don't know very much about Canadian media laws, but I do know a lot about British media laws. And, there is an agreement between the British media and the royal family that we leave them when they're in their private time. We don't take photographs of them on royal estates. We don't publish paparazzi pictures of the Sussexes out with Archie. And I think in Canada it might be different rules and different regulations. So they may find themselves leaving one problematic media behind, but perhaps walking into different media storm over there.
I just want to touch on a couple more things because these are big topics before we wrap up. And when you talk about the media, this question is sort of coming from a couple of people asking, why not go to America? I heard a commentator saying, and it was interesting to me, maybe a bit of a slight on Canada, that they're just staying in Canada until they can move to America. Do you think it's sort of a stepping stone? What other problems could living in America be?
I think they love Canada. I mean, I've travelled to Canada with Harry, as well as with the Cambridges, and they really love Canada. That is a genuine love for a country. And Meghan spent 7 years living in Toronto. But listen, they're going to be incredibly wealthy. There's no reason why they shouldn't have a property in both countries. And I think, that subject of LA won't go away because, of course, it's where Meghan's mother is. That's the only family she's got, and she probably does want to spend more time with her mum. So I wouldn't rule out the possibility of a home in both places, especially if they're going to make as much money as people think they're going to make.
The final question comes from Stella on Twitter, and this will sort of wrap this up, saying, why is the media so judgmental, particularly of Meghan, she feels? We've been hearing this term Megxit, really placing the blame sort of squarely on Meghan. a lot of talk about, is this racist? Is this, what's behind all of this? What's your take on that, about why it seems she's had such a tough go in the media?
Listen, I think marrying into the royal family is a challenge for anyone. I know people look at Kate Middleton and make, she made it look easy. It's not easy. Kate had her challenges as well. Anyone that thinks that Meghan has been singled out above anyone else I don't agree with that. Kate had a tough time. She was called Weighty Katie for years. She's had a troublesome time in the media too. I think it's the nature of the job, and it is a job. You are under intense scrutiny. You are going to be celebrated. You are going to be criticised. You take the brickbats with the accolades. It is the way it is. It's the way it's always been.
And I have heard the Duchess side saying, there is that conversation that going on though around a bit of an othering of Meghan, different from the way Katie is. I have seen some articles in BuzzFeed sort of comparing headlines. Do you see a truth in that between just the treatment of the two at all, or?
What do you think? Kate has been treated better than Meghan. Well, she gets an easier ride.
Yes.
Listen, Kate's been in the royal family for 10 years. I think I go back to the point I just made, which is that there was a time when she wasn't getting very favourable press. There was a time not so long ago when William was getting terrible press. Throne idol was the headline on one of the tabloids in the paper, the suggestion being that he doesn't do enough. You are going to get criticism. I think the difficulty for them has been sometimes putting themselves up on a pedestal, for example, preaching about global climate change, and then jumping on and off private jets. I mean, that's never going to sit well. I think there have been some silly decisions made along the way. I think they've surrounded themselves with brilliant advisors that they haven't always listened to. But I think there has been positive press too. And Heather and I were talking about it earlier, that celebratory mood ahead of the wedding. I don't think anyone wanted to pull her down from the start. I know Meghan feels, I'm told by sources close to her, she feels that particularly the British press were out to get her from the start. I don't think they were, but I think there have been a series of poor judgments, bad decisions that have contributed to this mess, which is frankly where we are now.
Well, I guess we'll wrap it up there. Clearly, there's still so many things that need to be sorted out.
Yes, a lot.
I know that the Queen is hoping to have this done quickly. A final decision in a couple of days is what the statement said, but I have a feeling even after that point, there's still going to be more to work out.
Well, some of the most, the most incredible brains are working on this strategy, and I think the one thing that the Sussexes want to do with the royal family is make this as quick a transition as possible to seal and sort this all out. But it is complex. It hasn't been done before. So it's going to take, I think, two things: patience and compromise.
All right, so we'll end it there. I've been joined by Katie Nicol, the royal editor with Vanity Fair, taking some of your questions today. I'm sure you have many more, and hopefully we'll be able to answer those in the days and weeks to come as we continue ourselves to get more answers about how this new role will work with Harry and Meghan. Have a great afternoon. And so they'll just be